Welcome and thank you for joining us for this webinar presentation. We are the Homeland Defense and Security Information Analysis Center, or HDIAC, one of three IAC domains in the DoD Information Analysis Centers operating under the Defense Technical Information Center, DTIC, within the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Research and Engineering. Our informative webinar series highlights current and emerging research and technology developments. It presents an opportunity for accelerating the DoD's leverage of these advancements by increasing awareness and fostering technical collaboration. HDIAC serves as one of the premier information research partners and curators of technology advancements and trends for the Homeland Defense and Security community. As such, our organization supports those working in the Homeland Defense and Security domain of DoD research and engineering. We do so by helping navigate the vast landscape of scientific and technical information, allowing our customers to get a head start on their technical projects. With an understanding of the Homeland Defense and Security DoD research and engineering landscape, we provide research and analysis services. We help unlock access to information, knowledge, and best practices from government, industry, and academia to stimulate innovation, foster collaboration, and eliminate redundancy. We hope you enjoy this webinar presentation and that it serves as a catalyst for community collaboration and improved DoD Homeland Defense and Security research.
Yeah, good day, everybody. My name is John Clements, and I am the technical lead for the Homeland Defense Security Information Analysis Center. And I'd like to welcome everybody today to today's webinar on terrorist exploitation of commercial technologies and the implications for U.S. national and Homeland Security, which will be presented by Dr. Austin Doctor from Insight. But before I get into formal introductions, just want to let everybody know that today's webinar is being recorded. So probably by maybe as early as tomorrow, we'll have it up on our YouTube channel. So if anybody, if you have to drop off or you have a colleague that wanted to sit in and didn't get a chance to, you'll be able to come back and watch it. Also, the webinar presentation slides are on our website. So if you go to hdiac.dtic.mil and go to the webinar section and then find today's webinar, you'll be able to download it. I put the link in the chat, and I'll re-put it in there in case some people didn't see it. But just so you know, the presentation slides are up and ready to go. I see somebody asked, what is the YouTube channel? So if you go to youtube.com/@ like the @ symbol HDIAC, that's our YouTube channel. And then the link will also be put up on that same website where you can go get the presentation slides. With that, I'd just like to point out that everybody is muted. But if you have questions for the presenter, do please ask them in the Q&A section. There's a 3-dot ellipses menu at the bottom right of your screen. You click on that, you'll see a Q&A section there. And if you put them in there, that's just the best way to ensure that I'll be able to see them and provide the questions to the presenter at the end. Sorry. With that, I would like to introduce today's presenter. It's Dr. Austin Doctor, and he is the Director of Strategic Initiatives and a faculty member at the National Counterterrorism Innovation Technology and Education Center, or Insight, a U.S. Department of Homeland Security Center of Excellence at the University of Nebraska at Omaha. His research informs U.S. national and homeland security policy and practice and focuses on the study of emerging threats, domestic and international terrorism, and counterterrorism. Dr. Doctor holds a PhD from the School of Public and International Affairs from the University of Georgia. And with that, sir, I will let you take it away. And I can see your slides clearly, so.
Okay, great. Well, good morning and hello from Omaha, Nebraska. Thanks so much for the invitation and the introduction. I'm glad to be here with you all today. My name is Austin Doctor. As John mentioned, I serve as Insight's Director of Strategic Initiatives. I'm a political scientist by training. My research focuses on emerging threats to our homeland security, on terrorist decision-making and leadership and malign innovation. I think everybody on this call shares the same mission. That's to protect Americans and our national security. And so I'm grateful for this chance to meet with this group to talk a little bit about Insight and our role as a force multiplying partner to the counterterrorism workforce. That's really to those on the front line ensuring our homeland security and defense. Because as we know, there are really very real threats out there. We just passed the 30-year anniversary of the Oklahoma City bombing. This is a time for reflection, but it's also a reminder to keep our eye on the ball. I think the attack in New Orleans more recently made clear that the terrorist threat is still very real. We've heard multiple security leaders warn about a dashboard full of blinking red lights. And from Insight, we see a threat landscape that's fragmented, it's diverse, it's not characterized by a single dominant wave of terrorist activity. What we see is a geographically dispersed presence of violent extremist networks and isolated individuals. This includes jihadist extremists, violent anarchists, nihilist violent extremists. It also includes a set of transnational criminal organizations, thinking about the drug cartels that were recently designated as terrorist entities. And alongside these changes in the threat actor landscape, we're also observing new patterns of terrorist activity. A widening range of targets, for example, including U.S. critical infrastructure, our public officials, as well as an evolving set of tactics and techniques enabled by more affordable commercial technologies and a wide dissemination of the required knowledge to execute these through various internet-based platforms. And so it's those technologies and related tactics that are going to be the core thrust of my comments today. I'm excited to jump in. And so this is where we're headed for the next 30 to 45 minutes. I'd like to give a quick introduction to Insight, our mission, and our unique role in the Homeland Security and Defense enterprise. Then I'd like to share some insights from our center's work on terrorist tactical innovation, and particularly how it relates to their use and exploitation of commercial technologies. Insight is an interdisciplinary center. Our teams integrate academic expertise from social and behavioral sciences, from information science and technology, and workforce operations. And so I'm going to be sharing out some insights from work that my colleagues Sam Hunter, Joel Elson, Aaron Carnes, and others have generated in the work that we are doing together. These are people that I get to join in the trenches every day. I'm looking forward to sharing out some of that work and then to our discussion and Q&A at the end of the meeting. Okay, so first, what is Insight? As the Department of Homeland Security's designated center of excellence, we're based at the University of Nebraska at Omaha. Our team tackles pressing and complex security challenges related to human-centric threats. And that means that it's our full-time job to provide cutting-edge research, tools, training in support of securing the U.S. homeland from terrorists, from transnational criminal organizations, and illicit threat actors. Our cooperative agreement, our basic ordering agreement through DHS, enable us to serve as a sole source provider of those critical resources to the counterterrorism community in DHS and its multiple components, as well as across the federal interagency. So bottom line, we're here to serve as a partner. As a center, we inform efficient and effective solutions. We maintain that depth of interdisciplinary expertise in order to enable an agile approach to shifts in the dynamic threat landscape. We're not strictly an ivory tower shop. All of our work is user-informed from the start. And so our board includes members and leaders from nearly every department and agency that has a stake in the counterterrorism mission. That includes DHS and its components, it includes OD&I, State Department, DOJ, and others. And our goal is to answer questions that matter to the decisions and actions that those teams are making. Building from our research, we do a lot of public engagement. We have an amazing comms team led by my colleague, Aaron Grace. And so for our unclassified work, this is a way that we transition knowledge and identify best practices across not just our federal, state, and local partners, but also to our communities. We host monthly webinars. You all can sign up and tune into our podcast via Spotify or our YouTube channel. So what we know is that the threats posed by terrorists and other illicit actors to U.S. Homeland Security and Defense are broad. They're immense. our portfolio emphasizes what we see as being core elements of that threat environment. In other words, we're doing work on the who, the what, the how, where, and the why across three main themes of research. And I'll just summarize these briefly. Our first theme focuses on terrorists and threat actors. We're really looking at a wide range of terrorist and homeland threat actors that includes, for example, a close mapping of the trends in jihadist-related threats to the homeland. One of our project teams, led by my colleague Seamus Hughes, just published an updated analysis of ISIS related federal charges in the US. This is available on our website. We also similarly study cartels, nihilist, violent extremists, anarchists. John, I'm seeing a couple comments regarding no sound. Am I coming across okay?
Yes, you are. Unfortunately, I think it's with the individuals. I'm trying to message some people back and forth, but some people
Okay.
are having connectivity issues.
All good. Just want to make sure comms were good on my end.
Yep.
So as we're thinking about theme one, a lot of our work in this space focuses on providing insights on key trends, on sources of change in leadership, organizational and network structure, recruitment, and specifically mobilization to violent acts of terrorism. In our second theme, we're focusing on that tactical profile and tactical patterns, specializing in understanding the process of terrorist innovation and the ways in which terrorists and other threat actors bring and integrate commercial technologies into their operations. So whether we're talking unmanned systems and robotics, artificial intelligence, the metaverse, the Internet of Things, I'm excited to talk a little bit more about that part of our work specifically today. But I do want to summarize and introduce some of the elements of this third theme of our work, which really focuses on the target space. So we're looking at critical infrastructure, border security, and soft targets that are increasingly key parts of the terrorist target surface. Terrorist attacks on U.S. critical infrastructure in particular have taken a front seat. One of our teams examined a sample of 100 different terrorist defendants in the U.S. over the past 6 years, and they found that 40% of those criminal activities targeted U.S. critical infrastructure sectors, those 16 sectors directly. Energy and transportation had outsized focus where they experienced a particularly high volume of threats in the recent past. Also mentioned that as a center based in Nebraska, that includes the critical infrastructure that's in our own backyard. And so we're looking at ways in which terrorists may attack or disrupt key elements of our food and agricultural sectors. So across these three themes, we develop analytic products, including peer review, academic studies, longer form policy reports, targeted briefs, and we build on the work that we're doing in these themes to then help maximize teams and initiatives across the Homeland Security enterprise. That includes trainings, guidance documents, and workshops focused on key and identified workforce development needs. So just as an example, and you can see on the slide, our team recently completed a revised edition of the Counter IED Grand Challenges Report. I see a couple of names among the audience today from fellow members of the DHS IED working group. So just giving them, Jason Stewart and others, a quick shout out. But in partnership with DHS and with the CISA Office for Bombing Prevention, we were tasked with identifying the future threat related to terrorist use of explosives within the United States and with recommending pathways to mitigate it through targeted research and development. And so the core motivation here was a need to coordinate and then deconflict the array of interconnected R&D efforts that are funded across the U.S. government, as you all on this call are aware. And so we drew on partnerships to make sure that we had full interagency input in this important deliverable, and worked with a number of DoD elements, including NGIC and IWTSD, for example. So as a result of this project, which is available, the report and other related elements are available on our website, we identified 10 grand challenges. That includes things like soft target protection, threat characterization, and information sharing and management. And so today, thinking about terrorist innovation, I'm going to focus on that second portfolio theme and some of the ways in which we see credible risks around terrorist innovation and use of technology. So first, I'd like to share a bit about what we're learning about the logic of terrorist innovation in general, just to set the stage for a deeper dive into the ways where we're seeing commercial technologies adopted and then retrofitted for malign purposes. Okay, so let's start at the beginning. Why do terrorists innovate? And I think to answer that question, we need to put ourselves in terrorist shoes just for a minute. Innovation reflects the outcome of a decision-making and implementation process. And so organizationally, terrorists, what we know is that they face this steady existential threat, right? Most groups, as an estimate, don't exist or don't survive, I should say, for more than a year. They have limited resources and they need to circumvent existing security measures and protocols. And so these circumstances motivate innovative solutions. And so here are some of the things that we're learning. First is that terrorist innovation is driven by necessity, opportunity, and organizational learning. We see terrorist actors, groups, cells, and networks innovate when they face security barriers like improved border controls or surveillance. We see them innovate when new technologies emerge, things like cheap, affordable, and accessible drones. And when they're able to learn from their own prior successes and failures or those of other actors within their networks. And so as a decision, terrorists are weighing the tactical advantage of adopting new tactics against the vulnerabilities that those tools may also introduce. Things like how trackable or traceable are they, or what's the risk of technical failure in the middle of an operation. And so what we know is that among terrorists, there are drivers of innovation, and there are those who adopt recent innovations. And so on balance, we see many terrorist actors tending to favor technologies that offer that higher benefit to risk ratio. Some of them are going to lag behind others in the latest innovations until those prove more practical or reliable. We also know that terrorist innovation diffuses or spreads through leadership networks and through other social learning mechanisms. And leadership can play a key role in this process. So new tactics, things like vehicle ramming attacks or the use of encrypted messaging apps, social media apps, things like Telegram, spread from one group to another quickly and often through those key nodes of network influence. We can see training videos, digital manuals, informal alliances sort of act as conduits for information sharing and innovation across even different global regions. So at its core, innovation focuses on solving a problem, and then with the implementation of an idea that is both novel and useful. And so in a malevolent context, terrorist actors are innovative when they adopt the ideas that are actually novel and useful in generating surprise. And I think in theory, as a concept, it seems relatively obvious why terrorist groups would try to innovate. But in practice, we see that done less successfully and less frequently than we might initially expect. And that's because innovation comes with risks, it comes with costs, and just like other human enterprises, not every terrorist actor group or collective is equally capable of innovation. Failure is an inherent part of that process, and not every terrorist network perceives that they can afford or fail to accept that risk. And so to capture the signal and the noise here, I think it's useful and important to look at key underlying patterns in terrorist processes and performance. And so I'd like to talk a little bit about the role that we're seeing commercial technology play in terrorist tactical innovation. And so for a couple of reasons, I think it's especially important that we're having this conversation today. For the first part, I think we see clear intent across the threat actor ecosystem to exploit emerging tech. I think we can take one look at our news feeds or the recent string of DOJ charges. Groups like defendants from Salafi jihadist groups or inspired by those groups, anarchist violent extremists, even the Mexican drug cartels now added to the FTO list. It's clear that all of these are keen to innovate, to adopt creative tools and tactics. So this isn't meant and this discussion isn't meant to be like a futurist projection. What we know is that now terrorists are actively seeking new ways to advance their causes through violence. Another reason to have this conversation is that emerging technologies stand to bolster terrorist capabilities. And the pacing issue here is, I think, a primary concern in terms of tempo and scale, where technologies are rapidly being integrated across stages of the radicalization, mobilization, and attack cycles. Whether we're talking about drones being used to deliver explosives, AI being used to streamline propaganda and recruitment efforts, or additive manufacturing being used to customize or circumvent standard surveillance or security protections. It's this democratization of commercial technology that's reducing barriers to entry, not just for skilled, but also for unskilled users. And so that increased affordability, that user accessibility, means that more tech is available for use by a wider range of threat actors. And just finally, terrorists are also wielding this technology to carve out new opportunities for lethal disruption. All of these stand to open new pathways to various extents and degrees and on certain different timelines, but to circumvent security measures. They provide grounds for tactical surprise, and they expose new targets and vulnerabilities. And so we have a general sense of why terrorists adopt and integrate commercial tech into their operations and tactics. I think there's a lot of potential value there for these threat actors. They can help to level the playing field. They can help these groups seize initiative. They can provide gains sort of outsized attention from media and from the public. But I think it's really important as an evidence-based community that we also right-size the threats stemming from terrorist use of tech. On one hand, we don't want to be Pollyanna and then caught in strategic operational surprise. On the other hand, we don't want to be Chicken Little, right? And then inappropriately allocate resources to non-issues. And so to get this right, identifying the relevant set of enabling factors, the key underlying mechanisms, serves as a helpful starting point. And so at Insight, we're looking at this from a lot of different angles. For the sake of time, I'm going to focus on two examples today. That is terrorist use of extended reality in the metaverse and terrorist use of unmanned systems and drones. So to begin with the metaverse and extended reality, the metaverse has become and meant many different things to many different people. As a team, we refer to it as an expression of extended reality, an internet-enabled ecosystem that encompasses augmented physical realities and immersive digital realities along a continuum. We've seen market forecasts continue to predict the integration of metaverse technologies into our daily lives. And most of these applications aren't just benign, but these are advancements to be excited about. Unfortunately, this also carries implications for terrorists and the counterterrorism workforce. And so two of my colleagues at Insight, Sam Hunter and Joel Elson, have led a multi-year effort to assess and forecast how violent extremist terrorists may exploit the metaverse to affect American security. The team published a short overview of this threat stream in the conversation back in January of 2022. Since then, the team's published several additional academic studies and reports, brief committees on the Hill, and different partners in the IC and federal law enforcement. As a team, we led a full-day workshop for our colleagues at NCTC, for example, a year and a half ago, to unpack this threat vector and implications for the counterterrorism workforce. And I think as a higher level theme, this work reflects what we do here at Insight. We work to provide actionable, evidence-based solutions to future-oriented problems. And this work requires interdisciplinary collaboration. Sam is an IO psychologist. Joel works in information science and technology. Our team is combining these insights to unpack how the metaverse can be used today and in the future to undermine American security and resilience. So the metaverse could emerge as this new arena for terrorist activity, right? Offering this powerful platform to enhance online operations, to support terrorist violent offline activities. And its appeal, I think, foundationally lies in two key features. It's been emphasized by Sam and Joel across their work. The first is the notion of presence here, that there's this feeling of sort of direct, unmediated interaction with others. And second is the notion of embodiment, that sense that, as a virtual avatar, for example, in a virtual setting, is a user's actual body. And so the combination of presence and embodiment make communication and engagement in the metaverse uniquely immersive and potentially more impactful than other existing internet-based communication platforms. And there are risks that US-based terrorists, FTOs, and others may use the metaverse and its related suite of technologies for a number of purposes, including things like recruitment and radicalization, coordination and planning, finance, the expansion of new targets. I'm going to circle back to that coordination and planning aspect in just a second. But this is important because we've started to see incidents of criminal activity on multiple metaverse-related platforms. So coming back to that coordination and planning aspect, the New Year's Day New Orleans attack, I think, offers a useful example where the FBI has reported that the suspected New Orleans attacker wore a pair of Meta's Ray-Ban smart glasses on at least 2 occasions in the city prior to the attack. These are glasses, for those of you unaware, these are glasses that have a camera embedded that can also be connected to your phone or other internet-based device. And some of the newer models are also AI enabled, which can provide things like real-time landmark or target descriptions. It can support navigation and movement or provide answers to general questions in a way similar to like a ChatGPT or other generative AI program. The New Orleans attacker used these smart glasses to record the attack location prior to the incident, and they seem to have proven a useful planning tool. Now, I will say it's also important to note the use of Meta glasses isn't fully new in spirit, right? Terrorists have been doing reconnaissance for a long time, but it does show how the line, based off of this enabled technology, how the line between the physical and the digital worlds is getting even more blurred. Eye-level footage in particular here, the type of footage that was recorded by the attacker prior to the incident, feels real and it feels immersive. That makes it easier to plan attacks because you can mimic what someone would actually see on the ground. And I think this offers just a glimpse into the metaverse, moving from the sort of science fiction, notion into real life. I'll also mention that this is not the only use case, right? It's not just New Orleans. We saw, for example, a Red Sea attack on an oil tanker last fall. Houthi forces, an Iran-backed designated FTO, hijackers from this group used an Instagram 360 camera to capture immersive footage. That was the first time we'd seen that kind of tech, at least publicly, in an attack. And so Sam and Joel have been researching and writing about the use of wearable devices related to the metaverse to aid in attack planning for a few years. They were 2 to 3 years ahead of the news cycle. And it's because of that, we were able to provide quick support to law enforcement teams working on this particular case. That's what we do here at Insight. We keep an eye on the horizon to help our partners maintain that agile and proactive response to credible emerging threats. Okay, so speaking of the horizon, and literally, our team is also leading academic research on terrorist use of unmanned systems. Again, this threat isn't new. Militants and terrorists have been using makeshift and commercial UAS for around a decade. So this is a known threat, but it's one as a general theme, but it's one that remains both unresolved and evolving at a rapid pace. The tools developed for countering UAS use by terrorists in hostile environments, particularly abroad, are not always actionable in a CONUS context. There are distinct authorities, policies, and tools within this area of responsibility. Meanwhile, and conversely, the number of reported incidents, the number of potential malign use cases of UAS in the United States is increasing. We see the widespread use of drones by drug cartels in Mexico also adding a new dimension to this threat as well. And so our research focuses on helping the Homeland Security and defense community stay on the forward edge of this dynamic threat vector. So we just hosted a full-day workshop with stakeholders across the counter-UAS, counterterrorism, and counter-cartel communities, really just focused on analyzing key emerging trends in this space. Some high-level takeaways from that discussion, in which we're going to write about in an upcoming report. First is that as a tool, UAS offer a more versatile threat and appeal to a lot of different types of terrorists and illicit threat actors. UAS can be used to support a lot of different tactical applications. That includes pre-attack planning, conducting kinetic attacks, logistics and operational support, and post-attack exploitation. And it's not just pro-ISIS homegrown violent extremists, it's RIMV actors, it's anarchists, and others. We also see that terrorists are clearly identifying value in UAS beyond their lethal capacity in those in conducting kinetic attacks. Terrorists are using drones to create targeted destruction, but then as a force multiplier, also enable precision and incite disruption. We're seeing critical infrastructure, event venues, and other soft targets as being especially vulnerable. Just in November, a few months ago, last year, a 24-year-old was arrested, right, during this attempt to use a drone to deliver an IED to disable a Nashville, Tennessee power substation. And so there were statements from local law enforcement, federal law enforcement officials that demonstrated that the attacker was dedicated to a neo-pagan white supremacist ideology and hoped that attack, if it had been successful, would serve to shock the system, causing these other power substations in the area to sort of have this cascading effect to also malfunction. And so we've seen similarly that drones haven't been used widely in mass casualty incidents against civilian targets in the United States so far. And to date, up to this point, we're seeing other weapon types that have been relied on when attackers are mostly intending to maximize their lethality. But I think this is an important space for forward-leaning research. We don't want to maintain a cognitive blind spot that this couldn't soon become the case, right? And so there's room and I think a need to identify specific conditions which could counteract that trend, right? What about the ability where we're seeing in commercial UAS to transport larger explosives or even chemical and biological weapons? Also mentioned that the sort of net balance, right, of barriers, of enabling factors related to terrorist use of drones is that combination points to some concern. We're assessing as a team that terrorists are facing fewer barriers and in some cases greater opportunities to incorporate UAS into their operations. And so as a result, the counter UAS community should be prepared for challenges of a larger scale and pace in the coming months and years. Now, as a parting shot here, I want to mention that most of our discourse in this space remains largely dominated by discussions of aerial-based drone systems. These air-based platforms have unique affordances that are desirable to terrorists for a variety of purposes, and they do comprise the vast bulk of malign use cases over the past decade. But if we're keeping our eyes on the horizon, I think it's important to mark and to note that terrorists face relatively few constraints in also exploiting unmanned systems developed for ground and maritime domains as those related commercial markets grow. Okay, let me wrap up things here, and I'm looking forward to getting to our discussion in Q&A with a few thoughts of what this means for the broader terrorism threat picture and solutions that we've developed to manage related risks to our homeland security and defense. Understanding the enabling conditions and constraints that inform terrorist decisions about innovation in particular is crucial. I focused today on sharing what we at Insight are learning about terrorist innovation through exploitation of commercial, sophisticated, emerging technologies. But innovation can also move in the opposite direction, right, towards more dated or even rudimentary methods. I think we could think about, for example, Hezbollah is using pagers or Hamas using couriers and handwritten notes. Innovation isn't always flashy. You can think about the shoe bomber, right? Which also points to another point. It's, first of all, not always flashy, and innovation doesn't always work. I think Hezbollah learned that the hard way as it relates to their use of pagers for command and control. So underlying knowledge and identifying those factors that inform these decisions around innovation and related processes can help us as we're working to counter those threats proactively to also skate to where the puck is going. Also mention the importance here, just underscore the importance of tracking terrorist use of other commercial technologies. Talked about drones and extended reality today, but we also need to be focusing and do on artificial intelligence, additive manufacturing, and the Internet of Things. The hardware, the software, the data that comprise all of these require greater research, I think targeted red teaming efforts, and related training. The truth is that the past is not necessarily prologue to the future. Terrorists will continue to look for new ways to create harm. And it's crucial that where those threats are credible, that we collectively aim to stay ahead of that innovation adaptation cycle. So to conclude, Insight is here to be a resource to you. You can find us on social media. You can find us through our webpage or directly at the emails that you see on the slide. I just encourage you, don't hesitate to get in touch. We turn around RFIs on a regular basis. We just sourced one recently from a law enforcement team in New Jersey. I appreciate your time. Looking forward to our discussion in Q&A.
Terrific. Thank you so much. An absolute tour de force, so to speak. And we do have some questions coming in. And I would like to encourage folks, if you have additional questions for the presenter, please use the ellipses menu in the bottom right-hand corner and type and go to the Q&A and ask your question there. That'll be the best way to ensure that I am able to see it by putting it in the chat. Sometimes hard to scroll through. So with that, I will get started on the first few questions that have come in. So one that I'd like to see is, or like to ask is, are there any examples of terrorists using the metaverse beyond the what you described with the New Orleans bomber or attacker? Are there any other examples you know of terrorists using the metaverse?
Yeah, thank you. And again, thanks for the opportunity to be here with you all today. I think, again, in the public information source, an area where we're seeing sort of these precursors to the metaverse and now early examples of it with established user bases or similar to gaming platforms, right? Immersive experiences like Roblox and others. There is indication of communities aligned around violent extremist causes forming. Now, the extent to which those are mobilizing into identified acts of terrorism is another question, but that would be another area related to the metaverse where I think there is some cause for concern and continued vigilance.
Great, thank you so much. And then another one. Do you think that terrorist organizations could use something like digital twins to do like a reconnaissance or otherwise plan and train for attacks?
We do. I think digital twins are an important element of the metaverse picture and some of the work that we're doing related to terrorist exploitation of geospatial technologies. So I'm glad to hear that question raised. Just as an anecdote, and again, with no demonstrated examples that this has been used by a specific terrorist cell, individual, or network, but we have some examples of digital twins of different government facilities that have already been made online, particularly pertaining to some of our national lab infrastructure. That type of digital twin would be useful for operational planning if they wanted to compromise those assets within our national security infrastructure. I also just saw recently that a full high fidelity digital twin of the Washington National Cathedral was just made online, but placed online recently. That would represent another opportunity for remote operational planning that might help an attacker, for example, again, with no, this is as an illustration, but would help an attacker plan or build out the parameters of a potential operation without making themselves susceptible to identification and surveillance by maybe local security.
Thank you so much. And then the next question, where can we get more information about the referenced attack in New Orleans? I guess beyond a simple Google search and coming across a lot of news articles, probably.
Sure. Yeah, we've tried to do some informed sense making of this with an updated account of how our research informs that incident, what we're learning more about that. You can find that information on our website. My colleague Sam Hunter, my colleague Seamus Hughes, and others have all uh, written some really smart analyses on that particular incident that I think shed light on it in a way that's maybe not available just through some of the existing news reporting.
Thanks so much. And if you want specific areas to look or something, the presenter had his email address up there earlier, and you can always email contact@hdiac.org, and we can link you with him to get more resources like that. Uh, the next question: where do you opine these terrorist groups are getting their unmanned systems, whether it be air, land, or maritime, especially potential swarms? Asked another way, what is the commercial or other supply chains? Is this just looked at via domestically or overseas?
Yeah, great question. I think a critical question if we're taking a counter network approach in particular to this identified threat stream. The supply chain varies actor by actor and AOR by AOR. So a supply chain analysis of, for example, CONUS or the U.S. homeland will differ from that. For example, of the Islamic State, one of our colleagues over at CTC West Point, Don Rassler, did a really impressive analysis of the supply chain that supported the Islamic State's early innovations, particularly in Iraq and Syria, in their use of commercial systems. That sourcing, that supply chain picture differs in the U.S. context, where a lot of these systems are available immediately in any big box store, whether brick and mortar or online. The supply chain question in that instance often has more to do with what types of explosives, right? Can these threat actors get a hold of? Whereas smaller munitions like grenades or small mortar rounds are more readily actually available in some of the more hostile environments where certain FTOs are operating.
Thank you. And another question, you may have kind of answered this a little bit during the presentation, but do you have any examples of terrorists combining these, for example, using additive manufacturing to make their own drone?
Yeah, I'm grateful for that question. I meant to underscore that, and that I think it's important to look at each of these streams or these suites of technologies on their own merit and understand related risks and vulnerabilities, but certainly to look at them in combination as well. I think the example of additive manufacturing in drones is a near term issue, particularly if we begin to see terrorist actors benefiting from online hobbyist communities that have developed the knowledge and skills around the TTPs that would be required. Anecdotally, there was an arrest of a PhD student in the UK who had been using a 3D printer to develop drones in support of the Islamic State. So I think there's certainly evidence in the public space that those two pieces are combined. Another one that I would underscore is looking at AI. We talk about the role of AI, for example, in supporting the capacity for innovation, decision making, creativity. Some of my colleagues here at Insight, again, Sam Hunter, Alexis D'Amato, published a really strong report, an academic article that demonstrates generative AI's role in that process. But it's also important to look at AI as it may be integrated with these other technologies. I think about drones, and we often talk about swarms, right? But AI is going to be a critical enabling function there in order to make swarms a more credible near-term reality in terms of coordinating and the networked nature of multiple unmanned systems in an operation. I could say more there, but yeah, I think the instinct is right. It's important to look at these things in combination.
Yes, and a good segue into the next question we have, which is kind of regarding AI, but not from the perspective of potentially terrorist use. So this question, data centers are quickly being built across the United States, and so with AI emerging and shaping the threat landscape, are there security concerns for physical sites and hardware such as data centers, and any general recommendations that could be implemented and utilized from a community perspective?
Yeah. So first, I would identify data centers as being vulnerable to attacks by terrorist actors, and particularly as they become more prominent in discussions around AI, the symbolism behind attacks on data centers as core elements of critical infrastructure may become more appealing. And again, this is conjecture. I haven't done work on data centers in particular, but also as a general theme, the ubiquitous vulnerability of our critical infrastructure, just given its scale and presence in each of our communities, data centers would often qualify as being, I think, vulnerable to these types of physical attacks. In terms of best practices, I would point you to some of the resources on our website, which have been developed for specifically guidance on protections of the physical security of software targets and our critical infrastructure.
Great, thank you. And this is actually really interesting, to me at least. So many private companies are using or starting to implement unmanned systems for deliveries and things like that. Has there been anything seen where these delivery systems get hijacked and then used to attack? And I guess a corollary to that would be, or is that something that you guys are investigating or looking into, if it hasn't already happened, how to prevent that?
Sorry, John, could you repeat the question?
Yeah, yes. So a lot of private companies, such as Domino's and FedEx, are starting to use drones and land-based robotic vehicles to make deliveries. So, has there been anything seen where these systems get hijacked and then used on an attack, or any planning or anything like that? Is that something you guys are looking at?
I think it's a really important potential threat vector to watch. I don't have public reporting on specific incidences that I can share here, but I think a growing appetite, if we're thinking about terrorist innovation and use of technologically informed tactics, looking at ideologically based cyber operations, for example, is a growing concern, and one that I think warrants greater attention. The use of those operations to hijack commercially owned or industry operated unmanned systems would be one example of a malign application in that case.
Okay. And then, do you have any current information on which transnational terrorist groups in the U.S. are using specific technology?
Yeah, I can offer a few examples here. So in terms of FTOs, right? So we're talking about persons who are inspired, enabled, or directed by foreign terrorist organizations based abroad. An example of emerging tech that we've seen used, for example, in a growing rate, are cryptocurrencies, and providing financial based or material support to groups like Hezbollah, Hamas, the Islamic State, and others. There was a team that was arrested on the other side, on sort of an unmanned systems side. Perspective here is there was a team that was arrested in Arizona last year for a plot involving not just an explosive, TATP-based explosive, but the delivery of that explosive using a remote control car. And so if we think about those RC-like units as an unmanned system operating off of a radio frequency control device, that's another initial public use case where we've seen these types of technologies used in support of foreign terrorist organizations and their broader causes.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. And then, probably coming to the close here, we've got a couple more minutes. So do you have a matrix of technologies in relation to their popularity of use as seen in the wild?
Yeah, really good question. We have a project that has focused on scoping this out, identifying the potential sets of new emerging commercial technologies, developing a anticipated timeline of not just their introduction, but then adaptation or adoption by terrorist organizations and some of the more immediate or more near-term threat streams that may arise from their use by threat actors. I don't have that report in front of me, but would be happy to circulate a copy with anybody interested if you want to reach out to me directly by email.
Okay. Let's see a couple other questions, but it looks like some of your colleagues might be answering them in the chat.
Oh.
So one other about, well, if you're familiar with this, can you speak to the FAA UAS 99.7 special security instruction, the no drone zone, if you're familiar with that?
Yeah, the counter UAS space, one of the greatest challenges that persists is coordination across the federal interagency and clear guidance on authorizations and who carries the ball when and under what conditions. This includes the FAA, who obviously has one of the leading roles in this process, but also with DHS and FBI being jointly authorized in the domestic counter UAS mission, coordinating with DoD in the cases of malign UAS use around sensitive military installations. And so I'll simply say that there's work to be done here from a policy and authorizations level. And in the meantime, I think a need for continued interagency collaboration and coordination and communication around identified threats.
Perfect. So we have two more questions sitting in the queue, and I think that's all we'll have time for today. So the first one, a very good one. Has there been notable effort in coordinating with federal agencies like the FAA, as well as state and local authorities, to enhance their capabilities in tracking, countering, and/or hardening unauthorized use of unmanned systems in the United States?
Yeah, I think there are some encouraging efforts underway. For example, DHS S&T hosted a counter UAS exercise in the National Capital Region earlier this year that brought together federal, state, and local entities in that area, both to identify potential malign use of UAS, as well as red teaming potential coordinated responses across those, not just federal, but state and local response groups. Okay,
and then the last question, just making sure I'm reading this right. Is your organization tracking or monitoring the progression of smart/safe cities, including the creation of twin cities? And it goes on to say, as well as Huawei PRC tech investments. I have not been able to find an updated map or diagram of what smart cities look like globally.
I think the smart cities and digital twin aspects folds into, again, the two projects that we're leading on, line use of geospatial tech and of extended reality in the metaverse. And I think this is really important when we take into account the scale at which already our critical infrastructure is connected and integrated in terms of networked and with an internet-based connection. In terms of threat streams, so that would be on the tactics, techniques, and procedures side and potential threat vectors. As the Academic Center of Excellence for Terrorism and Counterterrorism Studies, we were primarily focused on those set of threat actors. But I think clearly, and this points to the nature of the question, these are tactics, techniques, and procedures that can be adopted more broadly by a wider set of threat actors hostile to the United States.
Wonderful, and thank you so much for that. It was a brilliant Q&A session. Thank you to all the attendees. So many really good questions, really good engaging questions from this presentation. And sir, I'd like to really thank you for this presentation, for taking the time and working through with us to get it brought to fruition. I really hope Insight and HDI get to work together a little bit in the future. And again, thank you, and I look forward to working with you again.
Thanks so much. Look forward to staying in touch.
Have a great day, everybody.